You've been meaning to start for 3 hours now. The task is right there. The email, the assignment, the workout, the thing you told yourself you'd do this morning. And you've walked past it 6 times, opened it twice, closed it again, made a second coffee you didn't need, reorganized something that didn't need reorganizing, and somehow arrived at 2 p.m. having done absolutely nothing on the one thing that actually mattered today. You're not tired. You slept fine. You're not sick. You're not even that busy. There's time, right now, right there on the desk in front of you. And yet every time you sit down to actually begin, something invisible pushes back. Not loudly, just a quiet, almost physical resistance that makes starting feel harder than it has any right to be. So you don't start, you find something else to do instead. And the day gets a little smaller. By evening, the task is still there. And now there's a second layer on top of the original resistance. The guilt of having avoided it all day, which somehow makes starting feel even harder than it did this morning. Tomorrow, you tell yourself, tomorrow I'll just do it. Tomorrow arrives, and the whole cycle runs again. Here's what almost nobody tells you about that invisible resistance. It isn't laziness. It isn't weak willpower. It isn't a character flaw you need to overcome. It's a measurable neurological event, and a Japanese principle discovered inside a manufacturing philosophy from 1950s Osaka has quietly been the most effective solution to it that anyone has found. Kaizen, continuous improvement, but not the motivational poster version. The original version, developed in post-war Japanese manufacturing as a structural approach to making progress without requiring massive effort or disruption. The core insight isn't work harder. It's almost the opposite. Make the next step so small that the brain has no reason to resist it. Applied to procrastination, this produces something deceptively simple, the 1-minute rule. Not start for 1 minute and you'll want to keep going, though often you will. Just start for 1 minute. That's the complete commitment. 60 seconds of actual engagement with the task, after which you have full permission to stop. That single change, not in effort, not in discipline, just in the size of the commitment, dismantles the invisible resistance almost entirely. And once you understand why it works neurologically, you'll never look at procrastination the same way again. And it starts with something that happens in your brain before you ever open the task. Chapter 1. The brain's threat assessment. Every time you approach a large, undefined task, your brain performs a rapid, largely unconscious threat assessment, and large tasks almost always fail it. This isn't metaphorical. The prefrontal cortex, which handles planning and executive function, evaluates the energy cost of upcoming tasks against available resources. A task that is large, vague, or carries emotional weight, a difficult email, a long-delayed project, a creative task where failure feels possible, registers as a significant energy expenditure with an uncertain outcome. The brain's response to uncertain, high-cost endeavors is resistance, not laziness. Resistance as a protective function. This is why the resistance feels physical. It is, in a mild but measurable way, physical, a genuine neurological reluctance that manifests as the desire to do literally anything else. Reorganizing a drawer, making coffee, checking the phone. The brain is not being irrational. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do when faced with a task that feels costly and uncertain. The critical word there is feels, not is. Feels. A task that is approached as an enormous, undefined commitment feels costly. The same task approached as a single, tiny, clearly bounded first step feels trivial. And the brain's threat assessment responds to how a task feels, not to how large it actually is. This is the mechanism Kaizen exploits. Not motivation, not discipline, just a different presentation of the same task to the same brain, one small enough that the threat assessment passes it without resistance. The simple thing to try today. Before attempting to start anything you've been avoiding, write down the single smallest possible first action. Not the task, just the first step. Not write the report, but open the document. Not clean the house, but pick up one thing. That step is your 1 minute. That's all you're committing to. What happens after that 1 minute is the counterintuitive part. Chapter 2. The minute that doesn't stop. Here's what the research on task initiation consistently shows. The hardest moment is always the start. Once a task is in motion, once even a single minute of engagement has happened, the brain's relationship with that task changes measurably. A phenomenon called the Zeigarnik Effect means that an incomplete task creates a low-level cognitive pull, a mental open loop that the brain actively wants to close. Once you've started something, the brain registers it as unfinished and allocates background processing to it, which manifests as a reduced resistance to continuing. Starting 1 minute of a task makes the next minute easier, not through motivation, but through neurology. This is why Kaizen in Japanese manufacturing produced such consistent results. Small improvements, once begun, tend to continue not because people force themselves to continue, but because the act of beginning creates its own momentum. The system doesn't need willpower once it's moving. It only needs willpower to start, and Kaizen makes starting small enough that willpower is barely required. The honest version of the 1 minute rule is therefore this. The 1 minute is real and complete. You are genuinely allowed to stop after 60 seconds. But you probably won't want to, because the brain that resisted starting will, once started, find more resistance to stopping than to continuing. The takeaway: commit to 1 minute, genuinely. Set a timer. When it goes off, check in honestly. Do you want to continue? Most of the time, the answer will be yes. On the days it isn't, stop. 1 minute of progress is still more than 0 minutes of avoidance. There's a deeper reason the 1 minute rule works that has nothing to do with the minute itself. Chapter 3. The identity of someone who starts. Every time you avoid a task, you add a small data point to the brain's model of who you are in relation to that task. Avoid enough times, and the brain builds a stable belief. I am someone who doesn't do this. That belief then generates its own resistance, independent of the task's actual difficulty, because starting would contradict the established identity. This is why procrastination tends to get worse over time on the same recurring tasks. It's not that the task gets harder. It's that the avoidance pattern builds a stronger and stronger identity narrative around not starting, until the resistance is partly about the task and partly about who you've become in relation to it. Kaizen's 1 minute rule quietly dismantles this identity narrative from the other direction. Every time you do the 1 minute, even imperfectly, even briefly, even if nothing visible was produced, you add a data point in the opposite direction. I am someone who starts. Enough of those data points accumulated over days and weeks, and the brain's default model shifts. The resistance doesn't disappear entirely, but it loses its identity backing. It becomes a habit to override rather than a fact about who you are. In traditional Japanese craftsmanship and practice, the first gesture of a task, even a symbolic preparatory one, is treated as meaningful in itself. The bow, before beginning. The arrangement of tools before the work starts. These aren't rituals for ceremony's sake. They're deliberate, repeated acts of beginning that reinforce the identity of someone who begins, and that identity, built through repetition, becomes its own form of resistance to the resistance. The takeaway: treat the 1 minute not just as a strategy for today's task, but as a daily investment in becoming someone who starts. The accumulation matters more than any single session. Before I show you the piece that surprised me most, the one about the environment, not the person, let me tell you about the moment the 1 minute rule fails. Chapter 4. When 1 minute doesn't work. The 1 minute rule fails in one specific, consistent circumstance, when the environment around the task makes starting feel harder than it needs to. A cluttered desk, a phone within reach, a browser with 17 tabs open, a task environment that is visually or cognitively noisy doesn't just distract, it raises the activation energy of starting before you've even begun. The threat assessment the brain performs isn't just evaluating the task, it's evaluating the context the task lives in, and a chaotic, distraction-dense context adds to the perceived cost of beginning even for tasks that are otherwise simple. This connects directly to the Japanese concept of intentional empty space, applied here not to time or rooms, but to the immediate task environment. A clear desk, a single open document, a phone in another room. These aren't aesthetic choices. They're structural reductions of the activation energy required to start, operating below the level of conscious decision-making. In many Japanese work practices, preparation of the workspace is treated as part of the task itself, not a preliminary to the real work, but an integral, valuable component of it. Setting up a clean, specific, minimal environment for a task is doing the task. It changes the neurological context in which the 1 minute happens, making that minute far more likely to begin and continue. The takeaway: before attempting the 1 minute, Spend 30 seconds clearing the immediate workspace. One surface clear, one window open, one device silenced. The 1 minute you're about to do deserves a context that makes it easier, not harder, to start. This next one is the piece that ties the whole method together, and it has to do with what you say to yourself right before you begin. Chapter 5. The instruction that actually works. Most self-motivation instructions fail because they ask the wrong part of the brain to do the work. Just do it. Push through. Be disciplined. These instructions are addressed to the willpower system, the prefrontal cortex's executive function, which is, by the time you've been avoiding something for 3 hours, already depleted. Willpower is a limited resource that diminishes with use across a day. Asking a depleted willpower system to override a well-established avoidance pattern is asking the weakest available tool to do the heaviest available job. Kaizen sidesteps the willpower system entirely by making the instructions so specific and small that it bypasses the executive function's resistance assessment. Open the document requires almost no willpower to evaluate and approve. Write the report requires enormous willpower. The instruction itself determines which system handles it, and small, specific instructions route to a different, less depleted part of the brain. This is why the 1 minute rule works best when the 1 minute is specified as a single, concrete, physical action rather than a fraction of a large task. Not work on the project for 1 minute. Vague tasks are still evaluated as large tasks by the brain, even when time-bounded. But type the first sentence, or open the file and read the last paragraph. These are concrete, physical, almost trivially small, and they route around the resistance before it fires. The takeaway: when you're about to attempt the 1 minute, don't tell yourself to work on something. Tell yourself to do one specific, physical micro-action. The specificity is load-bearing. It's what makes the instruction work. There's one final piece, and it's the reason this works differently from every other productivity trick you've tried before. Chapter 6. Kaizen doesn't ask you to become someone different. Here's the quiet truth underneath everything in this video. The reason most productivity systems fail is that they require you to be a different person, more motivated, more disciplined, more consistent, before they start working. Kaizen requires nothing of the person. It only requires a different relationship with the size of the first step. You don't need more willpower. You don't need better habits. You don't need to fix your mindset or optimize your morning routine or become someone who wakes up at 5 a.m. You need to make the first step 1 minute long, and then actually do the 1 minute. This is the Japanese manufacturing insight translated into daily life. Systems improve through small, consistent, structural changes, not through demanding that the people inside them perform at a higher level through force of character. The system, the size of the starting commitment, is the variable, not the person. This reframes the 3 hours you spent avoiding the task this morning. It wasn't weakness. It was a system problem. A starting commitment that was too large for the brain's threat assessment to approve, in a context that added unnecessary activation energy, with an instruction that asked the most depleted available resource to do the heaviest available job. Change the system, 1 minute, specific action, clear context, and the same person who avoided for 3 hours will, most days, begin within 60 seconds. The takeaway, and the one to carry forward: the next time you feel the invisible resistance, don't try harder, make the steps smaller. 1 minute, one action, one clear surface. That's the whole system. That's all it was ever asking for. It's 2 p.m. and you open the document. Not because you finally found the motivation, not because you gave yourself a stern talk or made a new resolution, just because you told yourself, 1 minute, one sentence. That's all. You write the sentence, then another one. The timer goes off and you don't notice, because you're already somewhere in the middle of the thing that spent 3 hours being impossible. An hour later, it's done. Not perfectly, not completely, but substantially done, in a way that 0 hours of avoidance never produced. The invisible resistance didn't disappear. It'll be back tomorrow, probably, for whatever tomorrow's version of the task is. But now you know what it is. Not a verdict on your character, just the brain doing its job, evaluating the cost of beginning. And you know the one thing that consistently makes it step aside. Extreme laziness was never the problem. The size of the first step was. If this felt like something your procrastination needed to hear, there's more waiting for you here.